Hi there, I'm John and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And if you are new here, welcome. I'm John from Nigeria, and on this channel I review books. I do the monthly book wrap-ups, singular book reviews, and book hauls and all that good stuff. And if you're a fan of like written reviews, I also have my reviews uploaded on the Life on Books website, and the website is lifeonbooks.com together, so you can check that out. I love the written format, maybe more than the video format, but if that's your stuff, you can check that out. And the last time I was on here, it was for my September wrap-up, which was long overdue. So today I'll be doing a review rather, of a book I read this month actually. So I just could not wait. I actually finished it very early in the month, actually, like on the 5th or the 6th of the beginning of October. So I wanted to do a review then, but that holiday I talked about in the previous video happened. And since I really do not have like much content ideas, I really want to talk about this book on here because it's a very famous, very notable, very divisive American classic novel, and it is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Yes, I finally read this book. I think this has to be like my second or third American classic or something thereabout. But this is probably maybe one of the most famous books I've ever read, and one of the most divisive books I've ever read. I think this is even as divisive as the book A Little Life, which people think is very divisive. And in my head, I'm like, the things I've heard of this book is just a lot in its reputation for its main character, so on and so forth. But yeah, I finally read this, and let's get into the review. So I picked this up because I've owned it for a while. I bought it because of knowing its reputation, and I picked it up because it was quite short, and I read it in about 5 days. I read the first 100 pages on one night. I was at my friend's house and I did not have my phone with me, and I just launched into it. And it was published in the early 50s. I think 1951 is what my copy says that it was first published in, but I know that it was like serialized in the 40s, late 40s or thereabouts. I wanted to read this because so many of the things you hear about it is how its main character, Holden Caulfield, very famous name, is one of the worst male people in the history of the world, not just in the history of fiction. People who have read this hated it. I think it's also like usually read in high school, from what some of my American friends have told me. And I saw the other day a video on here of someone calling it like male manipulation. It was something along the lines of like feminist rates male manipulator novel. And by then I'd already read this, and I was so pissed. I found after reading this, even by the halfway point, I was shocked about the reviews and the divisiveness of the book. Or it's not even just that people do not like it. When maybe you don't like something, that's not really my issue. It is why you do not like it, and if your logic makes sense. I know reading, they say, is subjective and it's everybody to their opinion, but this is a book that really has quite the general opinion on the main character. Of course, people like it, but people also hate it as much. And I have come here to say, as a Nigerian who is reading an American classic, and I'm so glad it was not something that required like historical context or also like geographical context for someone who is not from there. It's something that you can understand as a book and its base story on their own. And I want to say all those takes I've seen on the internet are foolish. They are foolish takes. I find the people who make them to maybe not be smart at all, because anybody who has read this book and understands what it's about, and that the main character is a 16-year-old, I don't know what is male manipulator about this book and the whole thing about it being red flag for guys. I think that's maybe the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I am going to really say how I feel about some of like these takes these takes, I have to say, I'm so sorry, they usually originate from the West America, usually, because this is an American novel. A lot of the takes are from American people, and like I said in a video, I like that people do not influence my opinion of things. I like going into things blind, in terms of not just maybe plot, but just like in terms of when people are saying they do not like something, the why, I like to go and see it for myself, right? I have seen the why for myself in this book, and I am shocked, I am annoyed at the takes I see concerning it because they do not make any sense. On the book itself, we follow Holden Caulfield. He is 16 and he has recently failed out of school. We meet him at the very beginning where it seems he's like a rehab place or something. He does not really explicitly tells us, but you can deduce that. And it's kind of him like telling us about this very wild thing that happened to him like before he failed out of school, as he describes it. And so he describes it as what made him to come out to wherever he's at to cool down. So it's really like a story. And so we meet Holden, and from the beginning, I think from the very first sentence, I was taken. Like, it just swings into it entirely, launches you into this book where the first sentence and the first few sentences lets you know that this is a book where the character's voice is really the anchor of the entire novel. The moment you enter, what catches you is just the voice, the first person narration, the first sentence. Let me read it. The first sentence says, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all that before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. It is just so much, you get so much personality only from one sentence. And the moment I read it, I was like, I think this is going to be something good, because I'm not unfamiliar with first person narration, but just from the first sentence, I know it does not seem like, but this is unlike anything like I've ever seen in terms of like voice on a page before. It is like a full person you learn from just that sentence, and as you begin to progress, you see that it's the voice, it is the teenage boy voice, it is that being young voice. And from there, he begins to tell us of how he has failed out of a couple of schools before the current school that he has just failed out of, and that's like that was his final straw. So he's having to pack his things and move back home, and having to wait for his parents to find out that he has failed out of school. So that's really, the book is just him telling us what those few days were like for him, like having to readjust himself to being a failed student again and having to go back home. It's set close to around like the Christmas time. And so from there we see him like in just like these little occurrences, these little spaces, maybe his his dorm room, when he's trying to pack his things, and like you get a sense of like his personality and everything just from his interactions, but also his thoughts as well, because there are a lot of that inside of this book. And immediately you are able to like actually just relate to the voice and the character himself, because like I said, it's that teenage boy voice, it is that teenager voice in general, to be honest. You will get the sense of the way like some teenage boys think. I've seen like some of his type in like some of the foreign American films that I've watched, like those very white centric films. So you see a lot of like those thought processes here, but minus like bridging the border between like race or something like that. You just see like some general teenage thoughts. And from the get-go, I did not get the sense that Salinger wanted to like characterize the entire teenage experience, but that is what ends up happening, because I felt like when I was reading that, I said to myself, it's been long I read like a story. Like, we love the books that feel more like examinations of or character portraits of, and there's the character portraits, and maybe one of the most brilliant ever in here with Holden Caulfield as a 16-year-old and as a teenager. But like the story aspect and just progressively going, it is phenomenal on that front too. What I felt he wanted to do was actually just show a teenager struggling with his life, with his existence, going through that existential crisis that I think a lot of teenagers can relate to going through at 16, at 15, at 14, even at 17, maybe towards your 20s. And that is what we see with Holden Caulfield. So that was why the things I've heard about like this character and him being insufferable, they are some of the, I don't know, like I do not call things not smart outright. I like to listen and see, but there are just some things that are flat out just unintelligent in the way they sound, and I have never said it that I'm willing to fight anybody on anything, even my favorite books. But like, I am willing to disagree with anybody. I'm willing to even get like maybe unfollowed or something because of that idea that this book has like an insufferable main character. It has a teenage character that is not that is not unreadable. Yes, it may be insufferable in mannerisms, but not unreadable, and not a human person. We get a full human being in this character. And progressively, when we see like Holding and he tells us of his experiences failing with courses and things like that, with all the courses he has failed from, we learn that he's a great English student, right? We learn that Holding is very good at English, even though he's not good at other subjects. And with the way Sanja writes it, I believe it. I believe that this was true, because you just know somebody like this who, while they might not be like the best at some other subjects or even at expressing themselves, which is something we also see with Holding, because he tells us that he's unable to even talk properly, and we see that in like his voice throughout the entirety of the novel. But there's just this thing that makes you believe that he has the flair for English, and we see this through his thoughts as the book progresses, but not just his thoughts, his observations, the way he observes the world, the way he observes the people around him, the things he thinks. Things is just the little things, and you can believe him that this is like a student who actually really enjoys English. And so we get him telling us of the books he's enjoying reading, and the ones he does not like so well. We even get a point where his roommate, before he has to pack back home, his roommate asks him to write an English essay for him, because he knows that he's quite good at it. The teachers know that he's quite good at English, even though he's not good at like the other subjects. And I just knew that this is a person that exists, that can, maybe yes, they are not the best of at something, but they find like, he was able to latch onto like his literature, he was able to latch onto stories and find meaning in there. And you can just tell he's somebody who uses reading to perceive like the world too, and who applies like reading to life. And it shows up, like I said, in the way he thinks and the way he talks and the things that he says. And we see that he's very thoughtful, and Salinger captures like this thoughtfulness and this like perceptiveness in this teenage boy very well. And I think what I thought of when I was like thinking through the book was the quote, "When you are young, they assume you know nothing," which I usually attribute to Taylor Swift, because that's where I heard it from first. But I know she does like do some ton of phrases, but I do believe that might be her quotes from the song Cardigan, and that's one quote that has stayed with me. And I like how with Holding's character, he is the kind of person, he is every teenager, male and female, to me, in a sense where adults think like teenagers do not have anything to say, or cannot see the world, or do not have like the same eye they do in terms of seeing the world. But Holding is a representative that teenagers actually see, young people, not just teenagers, even children, because in a way it's a child as well, being so young. It's a proof that children actually see the world, children actually think on the world, think on the things that they see. These things leave impressions on them, and they harp on them, they meditate on them. And it's, for me, it just really attests to the fact that the adults who think these things, they do not maybe know the children as well, and it is maybe a limiting of like the brain of the child, so being just a childish brain. But you get to a stage where there's just so much that maybe you might not always have the words to articulate it, which we always also see in Holding, and you might not always articulate it like in the best way, but you have something to say because of what you have seen. And Holding, as we see, while it maybe might not have like the grandest life experiences, as somebody who is from a like quite well off home, his parents have some good money, so, and he's attending these boarding schools that are probably not very cheap for the time where this book is set. And so like, you, even for somebody who is wealthy and maybe might be well off, he has suffered in terms of education, at the hands of education, and he says he's unable to even explain why he's unable to latch onto like some of these subjects or do well at them, and even those are lessons enough for him to like understand some aspect to life. And not just that, we see his perceptiveness in like how he tells us about his surroundings, the people in his room, in his hostel, things like that, and the crazy shenanigans that happens around that aspect. And he does not like a lot of people. He runs into like some of these issues with different people, or just has it's for me, holding is that it's really just like a teenager in all his glory, and how teenagers, they like to think a lot, see a lot, and like they like to have opinions on everything. That is really holding coffee. He's a teenager. He's a quintessential teenager in the way he likes to have an opinion on everything, on adult things, on what adults do, on what the people his age do, and critique it like he's like the authority on everything. And I really like how Salinger really showed that through his character, and he's constant telling us of like the impressions he has on people, or that people leave on him, both the older and the younger people. Even as he's going along on the trains, the things he sees, he's constantly telling us of these things. Because like I said, that very first person tone, that he's like you're having a dialogue with somebody, that's what this feels like. They are so funny, like the humor in here is golden. He's been nasty sometimes in his thoughts and in his like perception of people, and sometimes being mean, sometimes being compassionate. But like even when he's not being the very best person, which teenagers have that tendency about them, he still, the observations still somehow manages to feel just humorous in the and even though he's insufferable at points with like his thought processes, which might not always, he thinks they are the best, but they are not always like the best at times, even then he's still making you laugh. And I just found like Salinger's like use of humor as a device, even in like respect to these observations, very interesting. And I think they hit the mark a lot of the times they were done in this novel. And there were points where even with like I said, with Holden not being able to, he tells us that he does not know how to properly express himself, and so there are a lot of like repetitions in this book with certain words, certain phrases. He uses the word phony. He practically calls everybody a phony. Teachers, his friends, the ones acquaintances, calls them funny. Uses word like old this, old that, and he repeats some words over and over and over again. And I just thought that added like to the charm of like what Salinger was trying to do here, in like giving us this character in its entirety, and giving us like the mind and the personality. Like this is a full character. Like the character felt full in all its variation, like in every aspect, mentally, like in the mind, you understand, in like personality wise, you're able to deduce the kind of person he is, just by the way Salinger like imputes all these like experiences, all this repetition, all these thoughts also. And him calling people funny, always talking about how some things depressed him, maybe something he saw, it just reminds you of that teenage experience, which I'm not very far from. I'm only just like 21, and so it just reminded me of, even then being so young, there was a part of me that felt like I knew everything, and I see it now in younger people too. And I saw it then in like my age mates, then feeling, being young, being a teenager, and feeling like you know everything, like you have all the answers. But it's when you, as you grow older, you see that you do not know as much as you thought you know when you were younger. I think the holding is just, I might just say throughout like a review, that this is just the teen experience in general in a book, and it is done so well. Like it is such an achievement, the teen experience, the way it is captured in this book. And back to the way he is described as this terrible male in his voice, he does have sometimes these comments on things, on people, on women too, but I did not even feel like they were so extremists, to be honest. Like I did not feel like they were like the worst, far out there things you can hear anybody say, because a lot of them felt very of his age, of like the kind of things he would think, like I said, from seeing people who have thought like the film media, even in real life as well. But like I just saw a character, I saw a person going through an existential crisis. That was it, because we see from everything that is happening to him constantly failing in school and not being able to give his all to school, you can just tell that he's at that point, he's at the teen existential crisis point, and wondering what like his life really is for, if he's constantly failing and failing and failing and not being able to just properly make it through a school. It's from school to school to school to school. And so I, rather than see somebody with the insufferable voice, the voice helped me, and the tone and the mannerisms and the things he thought, those things helped me to see him as what he was, which was a 16-year-old boy. And they helped me also to see like his existential crisis. Like, I think that's what one, like, I think Sanja writes him in such a way that you are just able to believe him at the ages, that you are able to believe his thoughts. He has so many feelings, which is a prime characteristic of being a teenager, which is those very big angsty feelings, and you see all of them and I was thinking, I think at a point after finishing this book, I was thinking of everything I was seeing, the male manipulator, insufferable male comments, and I was thinking like, what will people think if they read the novel New Millennium Boys by Alex, I think Kazemi or something like that. It's a book that came out, I think last year or this year, which I even have not finished, but it is really about like teenage boys in the turn of like the century, from 1999 around to like 2000. But even then, like that, the voice, everything is so much more uncomfortable, like the things, the vulgarity in the book, like the thoughts, and that also is very much a characteristic of that time. And like the way it's a white car, and the way like those white boys felt like in that time. Even though I'm not from the US, I've seen a lot of like foreign media, heard a lot of things, read a lot of things that helped me to at least be able to say like this is a characteristic of this thing, and know that it was actually like that. And so reading that book, I've not been able to finish it for reasons that I don't know, I don't want to get into today, but I'm wondering how people who think this, if they read that, they will jump off like a very tall building and want to kill the male characters inside that book, even though they are probably at the same age, but they are even so much worse. And I felt like they felt so much like the product of the times they were in and that generation, and how the young boys of that time, white boys, spoke then. And so it's the way, if it was like a black main character, I would expect a different tone of voice with maybe similar thought processes in some things, because they are not so far off in everything, being male and all. So but it is just that I think people will flip if they read that book in comparison to this book, and they will know that this is actually so much more tamer than they are making it out to be. So I liked how, like, with the way Salinger wrote like Odin and his voice and his character, while you saw him as a 16-year-old and very young with all his big feelings and big thoughts, you saw the evident flaws with his character. Like, it is growing up and being past that age, you saw that you might not have been like the best teen when you were 16. You might not have been like the best teenager. You might not have been the best person, maybe to your friends or your parents, even in reactions, in maybe your thoughts around that age. You are able to see with age, as time has gone by, that what you thought were perfect thoughts, perfect feelings, not everything was as perfect as you thought it was in that time. And you see those kind of things here, that he's having the kind of feelings and reaction to life that he would go past a few years after this to see that he probably was not the best person in all aspects of his life, and that he did not know as much as he thought he knew. Because the more you go along in life, even though I sound so old, but you see you do not know as much as you think you know. And I think it is why I'm able to just like advocate for Odin and his character so much, because Salinger gets that part of being a teenager right. Like, adults who read it, like, they are able to see that yes, he is a bit annoying, whiny, and he's also depressed, he's also sad, but there are flaws in his thought processes, there are flaws in his thinking, there are flaws in his calling everybody a phony, while also being a bit pretentious at points and with certain things as well. And so it's all these things that add like to the just to the brilliance of the way this character is written. And one of my favorite aspects of the novel was his relationship with his sister. Maybe my favorite because while she is mentioned from time to time by him, he mentions her occasionally. And what I saw with how he constantly referenced his sister, his younger sister Phoebe, and he had a brother who was dead, who he also referenced from time to time. But what I saw with how he mentioned his sister Phoebe and how he loved her so much, wanted to keep her safe from the world, from seeing the things he had seen, in the way he expressed himself, and in relation to being her brother, in relation to her being so young, you can tell that was his, and he might have even phrased it in ways akin to that at points, on just having to, he felt so much like big brother wants to safeguard sister from like the big bad world, because he thought he had seen so much of the world at the point he was at, going out on his own, like taking train rides on his own, doing a lot of crazy things that I thought like felt extreme at some points on his own. But I remember that that is America, and some of these things 16-year-olds can do that even without license of parents, but can still do it on their own accord. And with his sister and how he described like the relationship, what I saw with what Salinja did with that was that what the question I can ask it as is, if you have been depressed, and if you have been sad, and if you have felt despondent, if you have had like this question of who you are and what your life is for, who was keeping you going, who kept you going, who were you staying back for, who was that person who you constantly thought of when you wanted to die, but there was, who did you think of when you were thinking, oh, I do not want to do this anymore, who was keeping you here essentially? And that was who his sister was to him. And he very much felt so much realer in that aspect, because you can relate to, you can just see your past self if you have had this kind of experience, in that maybe look back on your past and you might not have been the best person, but there was somebody who, even you who might have been not the best person, had your heart with, who your heart was like holding out for, who you loved so much that you did not want to offer those like bad parts of your traits. Even then you knew that you did not want them to see those evident flaws in you. You shielded them, you tried to keep those flawed sides from them, and that's who I thought his sister was to him. And I really loved that. I really loved like the insight of that in the book. It almost made me cry at some point, to be honest. I think holding is so relatable in how it's written, not just to men but to women even. My friend, I found out there's a friend who I've mentioned on here a couple of times, who I body read with, my friend here in Nigeria, and it was after reading this I found out that she had read it earlier in the year, and it was one of her favorite books of the year. And when we had a little discussion on it the other day, and she also addressed like those silly comments which I mentioned, and found them appalling in the same way I did. And she told me that the way she phrased it was, when she was young, she like, which teenager when they were young did not hate everybody? She was like, I hated everybody. She had this many feelings to her parents, to the people around her, like everything was irritating her constantly, everything was being overly analyzed, which like is what they call feed. But this was like a lady talking to me, and I just felt like, and I did not need that to validate my thoughts on the way people see Odin's character and how I find that it's like a flawed opinion. But I just like that there was somebody else who shared like that thought with me, and I've come to see a few people also who share that thought with me as well, which I really appreciated it. It's like the Catcher in the Rye, I can see why it was revolutionary when, and just so praised and so hailed when it was released, and how it must have felt singular, even though I do not know a lot of the literature from the time. But why is it that, speaking of books from like the 1900s and maybe latter part of the 1900s, this book is so hailed in a way, even when people hate it, the people who seem to champion it so highly as being like this singular novel with a singular character, which I totally believe. I think this is an achievement in characterization, but more so, I believe Sanja touches one of the highest peaks that I've seen an author touch in the way they write voice in a book. This is an achievement in literature in the term of voice. Like I believe I used to think of things in terms of story. There's the story aspect, there's the writing aspect, and there's the character and the voice aspect. And this, in terms of the voice, this might be one of the greatest book with maybe the one of the most singular voices I've ever read in my life in any book. I loved this book so much. I got to the end and I could not find like the flaw I was looking for in order not to give it like the complete 5 stars that it deserves. So this is my second 5-star read of this year, The Catcher in the Rye. I love this book so much. I want to slap the people. Like, if you give me another, I'm not saying you must like it, but that particular reason people give for not liking it, I do not think that one flows. Maybe you did not like the character, but I do not think character dislike is equal to dislike of the entire novel. Those are some of the, let me not start again, to be honest. But yeah, I just felt like the way he captured like the teen angst, that's just teenage, being a teenager, he did it so well. I can see how this was maybe the template for what a lot of YA first person type narrative, which YA books are mostly the first person teenagers with so much feelings, the big feelings, and they get that right at least, but there's just something always lacking in it and something always same in the delivery of like these YA books and how they feel like you are reading the same thing over and over and over and over again. And that's why I liked some YA books growing up, but not a lot, to be honest. And now it is very hard for me to read like YA books, maybe because I'm a bit past that age. That I cannot deny is a factor, but the writing never felt like so substantial. But in this case, I think I can see how this was the template that those try to copy and they maybe did not, YA writer did not always like hit it on the mark for me with it. But Salinger, he nails it so much. This is a book. Like, there are books that you read and you know that this is like literature. They just shock you, they wow you. This is the second one that is doing a big impression on me this year, and I think I see, for the people who champion it so much, I think I see why, and I see the acclaim. And yeah, I really love this. One of my favorite books of the year. I highly recommend it. If you have not read it, please discard what you hear people say and go into it and make your judgment for yourself. And I think that is it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope I did not step on anybody's toes. If you liked it, please subscribe and share. Please help me share. I'm very close to the 100, and yeah, I would love to see more people who have read it in the comments. Like, please, I would love us to discuss your thoughts. If you had a disagreeing opinion, I would also like to hear that. I'm not like entirely the authority on anything, or so deciding that I'm not going to hear anyone's opinion. So I would love to actually hear your opinion, and let's just discuss. And if you a lover, a hater, please in the comments, I want us to talk. So yeah, and I'll probably see you in the next one. Bye.